the second and final part of painting a portrait with acrylics using patches, where I primarily want to share my impressions. When I was reviewing the first part of painting this portrait, I noticed several moments when I could have finished the portrait already, when it looked decent. Well, alright. And in the end, the final version turned out worse than the versions that appeared during the process. There are 2 points here. First of all, of course, it's best to know when to stop, to feel that line when it's better not to add anything else and just leave it as it is. And the second point here is, of course, controversial. That is, on the contrary, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to ruin the painting, because through these experiments you grow, you gain new experience. Even if at some particular moment you didn't manage to make the painting better, you will still gain some knowledge and experience that will help you in the future. And now actually, what am I doing first of all? I'm fixing the hair, because when the colors dried, everything got much darker and almost none of the shades that were there remained. Also, if you look at the previous part, there were colors and shades in the background, but in the end, the background became almost black when it dried. So basically, this brings us to the main differences between oil and acrylic. That is, the colors change a lot when they dry. I talked to some students who like acrylic, who often work with acrylic, and they told me that basically if you use good paints, good quality, they won't lose their color when they dry or get darker. In my case, I used paints, and I also used paints from a certain brand. In my opinion, well, not just my opinion, but it's actually true, they are mostly the cheapest in terms of price. So accordingly, I think their quality isn't that great because of this. I mean, when they dry, they get darker. So in the end, the main thing is that they get darker. And there's also a very important point that made it hard for me to work. I'm used to smudging spots I don't like with my finger, for example. For example, I put down a brush stroke, and if the color is too loud or bright, I usually just take my finger and smudge it as much as I need. The more I smudge it, the less color remains. And all of it is gently removed, so it becomes more transparent. That hardly works with acrylics, especially if you're working on the first session and everything is still wet. It turns out that the color just gets completely scraped off the canvas. And the difference in consistency is kind of like an analogy, like oil. It's basically oil, oily, greasy, that kind of consistency. And accordingly, when you remove some paint, it doesn't come off completely. It really sticks to the surface, and only the top layer is gently removed, the rest stays on the surface. With acrylic, it's more like a sticky substance, which when you try to remove it with your finger, it sticks to the surface. Well, accordingly, in some places it already manages to stick, and in some places it doesn't, so it sticks to your finger and peels off from the surface. That's what I found really inconvenient, and that's why I don't really like acrylic as much in this regard. By the way, look, I really liked this stage when I was working. I mean, I added this blue color, and that's it. I could have left it like this already. That's what I did in the first session. And in the end, I removed half of it later by adding the hair on top. And it was gone. Here's this interesting idea to design the lower part like some kind of blue flame. I don't know. There are a lot of different analogies you could come up with here. That's actually why I wanted to do a second session again, so that at the very least, the painting would turn out no worse than it did during the first session. That's why I'm restoring the background. I restored these blue colors, these blue lines going from bottom to top, and I just added everything in terms of brightness and contrast. That's it. When it comes to experiments, remember this crucial point. While working on something, don't fear trying new things or making mistakes. This fear of messing up, the fear that something won't work out, it often stifles all creativity right from the start. And because of this, you keep yourself within certain limits. You simply don't allow yourself to try something new or to learn something new. In general, always keep this as a priority. The experiments themselves are what matter most. Because, again, I think I started experimenting like this myself, of course, thanks to the fact that I record content and work on social media often. Well, not often, basically almost always. So when I create content, naturally, my main goal is to make it interesting, so it's not boring, so there aren't monotonous portraits and so on. Accordingly, every time I have to come up with something new, and this very drive for novelty is what taught me to experiment. Well, again, that's thanks to the fact that I wanted to make things more interesting for the viewers. So, regarding my work right now, what exactly am I doing? Look, I restored the color in the hair, made it a bit warmer, kind of orange-brown, yellow-brown. So I added some blues, added a bit of background, and soon I'll also make the face a bit more contrasted. And by the way, in the video, the face looks quite bright but in reality, when you look at it, it's actually kind of orange. Apparently, on a dark background, the camera brightens things up a bit, and that's why the face looks lighter, but the face turned out to be really orange. By the way, I'm recording the whole process at double speed again, because otherwise it would take too long. I think it's pretty clear what's happening even when you see the process at double speed. If you want to watch it in real time, as usual, you can set the playback speed to half in the settings to do that. Here's something else I'd like to mention about the differences between acrylic and oil. Yes, I talked about color changes. I talked about consistency, that acrylic can peel off and they can smudge. Another thing is that it's much harder for me to mix the right shade. Let me clarify what I mean by the word those here. That is, on the face, there are often very subtle transitions that are barely noticeable from each other. Some areas are a bit more blue, some a bit more green, some a bit more pink, just a slight difference. And with oil paint, you can really feel it clearly how to mix it all, add or subtract. With acrylics, at least for me, I can't really feel how much thinner I need to make something or whether I should add what's already there. Any of the paints, plus how they dry, again, they change. Or sometimes the shade just disappears completely and everything turns into one color. In general, it's difficult for me. Maybe I just don't have enough experience with acrylics yet, but honestly, if you don't worry too much about the shades, it's still pretty hard. If you don't want to paint a picture, then it's actually a pretty good material. There's no smell at all. Brushes can be washed without any solvent, just with soap, so it's actually quite pleasant to work with. If acrylic gets on your clothes, it's much harder to wash off if you don't clean it right away. It's almost impossible to get it off your hands too, especially if it dries. But as I mentioned, it's quite sticky. So on the face, accordingly, I'm adding, look, the main colors, some contrasts, darker lips, a bit more pink, and I added more yellow and lighter tones to the face. Other than that, nothing else has really changed much for me. And of course, in real life, the painting looks more interesting because the camera doesn't quite capture the shades. But in any case, I like the emotion itself. It seems to me that lately, all of us have been feeling these kinds of emotions about what's happening, and I'm glad that I'm able to release these emotions onto the canvas, because after that, it becomes a million times easier. That's why I recommend you draw a lot more, experiment, because you get a huge amount of joy from it, no matter what. So creativity saves you. It's really great. So well, what else should I tell you? Basically, this whole course has been added for me. This video has been added to my main oil course, and now it's a fully complete course. There is oil, acrylic, and a lot of my own information there. It's just like this with palettes and everything. The only difference is that here I did everything on one screen. To make things simpler and not use two cameras in the course, because I usually use two cameras, one of which films the palette, I did it this way. So now, by adding a bit more contrast, all these contrasts really fade when the paint dries. You make it look contrasting, but when it dries, it disappears into the oil again. It doesn't happen that strongly, of course, but still, it's possible to say so. Of course, I'm just not used to acrylic, not used to mixing the shades that will be there. I mean, I'm not used to predicting the color that will remain after it dries. I add a bit of orange, and that's it. I hope you found the video interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to write to me. I'll be happy to help you.